Welcome to the roterotecast, episode 2, the Betrayal at Munich. It is quite an episode, and I'm very sorry for how depressing it's going to be. Also, we're trying to get more supporters on Patreon, and if you can do a paid support for $5 a month, it would be a huge help. Thank you very much, and let's get into the show. This weekend and last week was the Munich Security Conference, and it got off to an explosive start with Donald Trump talking with Vladimir Putin on the phone about setting up a one-on-one peace deal about Ukraine without the European Union, and J.D. Vance going off on a crazy Groyper speech where he said that the U.S. was no longer going to be the guarantor of security in Europe, setting the conference ablaze. Now, if you're not deep into kind of defense policy world, you might not be aware of the Munich Security Conference. This is a massive, major security conference, probably the one that's the most important in the world. This is where companies, countries, and organizations come together to hash out agreements and disagreements on defense policy. It is primarily focused with a lot of European partners and the Transatlantic Alliance, but it has participants from around the world, and it is an important event to see. I highly recommend you definitely go check out the event. It was all live streamed. You can see it on Deutsche Welle. But the event was absolutely insane. If you've never been to any of these like large multi-international kind of conference things, a lot of the time not a lot is said or gets done. And while Munich has a lot more stuff that actually happens that is consequential, it did not feel like what happened the last few days, which felt like an earthquake happened and a comet hit the building, and you had all the 7 plagues of the Bible happen all at the same time. The idea of the US quickly withdrawing from Europe, and not only that, carving up a European country without any participation of any European country is quite insane. And this was treated with fear, with rage, with shock, and even sometimes inspiration by the attendees, whether they were world leaders or leaders of major organizations. And it is very scary to think that the world that Donald Trump in his second term is building is happening and is taking place so quickly. But it is one that needs to propel Europe, especially the European Union, into high gear, not just around defense, but around every aspect of its policy. For decades and decades, the United States has been integral to every aspect of Europe, and now it is, at best, a very hostile ally, and that is a strange and a dangerous situation for the rest of us. And we have another situation where a war might be concluded in the next days, as Donald Trump has announced that he will be going to Saudi Arabia in a few days to meet with Vladimir Putin to create a peace deal. Well, this is very, very dangerous for Europe because a lot of things are about to happen very quickly, and honestly, we're not prepared for it. There is many things to think about in a peace deal happening in Ukraine and what this actually means for us. We should have no illusions that this will be peace just because we have an absence of war. This, unfortunately, will be nothing more than a prolonged ceasefire for Russia to re-gear and get ready for its next wave of conquest. We must not forget that Vladimir Putin has been very, very, very clear about his aims. He wishes to conquer all of Ukraine. He does not believe it should be a country at all, and this is a war not just on Ukraine, but upon the European Union and upon liberal democracy itself, which he sees as counterintuitive and antithetical to the existence of his Russian Federation. This is the reality of the situation. This is the same insanity that people like J.D. Vance are pushing, or Donald Trump, where they see out of paranoia and fear and right-wing conspiracy theories about the European Union a threat. And this unfortunately means that we have to take these all very seriously and immediately. It also means there needs to be great solidarity of coming together. This is not something that can be pushed aside. This is not something that we can ignore anymore. We have become very not just complacent upon America providing defense, but also upon our literal defense munitions and weapons systems. We produce significantly less than we need to within Europe, and we do not produce the systems to be able to do things independently. Detachment from Europe by the US goes both ways. This means we will need to be investing in huge amounts of increase in infrastructure and industry to create the defensive industries that are able to replace everything we are losing, and losing fast because of Donald Trump. And that is something that will happen. It is being proposed by President Vladimir Zelensky that it will require an army of 1.5 million people to guard a border in a ceasefire. That is a shocking amount of troops, and that is more than double the amount of troops currently in the Ukrainian army at 700,000. We need to have a major increase. This will have obvious upsides. There will be massive amounts of jobs because you will have a bunch of military jobs and a bunch of military contractor jobs and everything around that. It will require huge amounts of building and infrastructure, and it will require Europe to effectively replace the entire American market, one thing at a time, especially with the two-punch of getting tariffs and sanctions and having the US pull out of the transatlantic alliance. And this is very dangerous, not just for Europe and the European Union, both in and out of the European Union. It is importantly dangerous for everyone who has had the US as a security guarantor around the world. Canada, Japan, South Korea, Philippines. These are all dangerous situations for a lot of countries that are going to find them needing to do massive increases in military spending to maintain their security. And this is a world that we have not lived in, especially in the European Union. The peace dividend offered to Europe after the Cold War and after World War II, which allowed for the creation of some of the most advanced places on Earth, was allowed in a large part because the United States effectively subsidized the defense of the continent. And now the continent is going to need to pay it for itself. It is already being proposed to use defensive spending as non-deficit spending for countries. There's been proposals around Eurobonds. But unfortunately, we saw again at the Munich conference, German politicians from the SPD and the CDU being hesitant about deploying, again, weapon systems like Taurus missiles, and again, about financing the funding of what everyone agrees on is a much larger military and a European-wide military. This is important to also understand that in a world that is fracturing, the multipolar world that people like Vladimir Putin wanted to create, that is unfortunately now here and fracturing quickly. In that world, there are countries who are either going to be in the European Union or into one of the other blocs. This has also brought about a conversation around accelerated accession, especially for the Western Balkans. And the EU Commission said at the Munich conference that it will be looking at rapid accession within 2026 and 2027 for the Western Balkans. These are good news. I firmly am a huge supporter of rapid accession. But this shows that the geopolitics has changed everything. Everything is different now. We have to understand that the European Union will either grow and pull in every country that aspires to be it, or they will be at the whim of being conquered by one of our expansionistic neighbors, or placed into a situation where they're in a protection racket, like what Donald Trump seems to believe the US's role should be in the world, where you either pay him or something bad might happen. We are in a dangerous situation with mafia boss, wannabe world leaders, and the rise of fascism all over the world. We have German elections in just a few days, where the most dangerous party, well, unfortunately, one of the most dangerous parties in Europe, the AfD, who are great friends of Vladimir Putin, will be looking to form a government soon. And if the polls are correct, they will be, unfortunately, one of the largest parties. And we have to hope that the conservatives decide to not form, unfortunately, a government with the far right. And unfortunately, we also see from recent events that Mr. Merz, leader of the CDU, is not a very trustworthy character in that regard. And every time we lose a country, we lose a government, we lose a region to the far right or a conservative party that has decided to work with the far right or absorb the far right itself, we have a major damage to the whole democracy, the entire European Union. We get weaker and easier to manipulate and break apart. Our security becomes literally at risk. And this is a problem. This is why it has been much more important to deal with problems over democracy and rule of law in an expeditious fashion and not allow petty tyrants to exist within the European Union, for example, like Mr. Viktor Orban, or the wannabe Viktor Orban in Slovakia, Mr. Robert Fico. It's really important to understand that we have moved into a new era. Everything that happened after World War II that was set up has been shattered, ironically at a place named Munich, known famously for the betrayal of Czechoslovakia, where appeasement was used to give it over to Nazi Germany. because people thought that would lead to peace if we just gave them the land that they wanted. Just like Donald Trump is pitching the idea that peace will happen if we just give Russia the land that they want. But we have seen again and again through centuries that this is not how you deal with tyrants. You can only crush them and make them no longer a threat. You do not make them more powerful and expect them not to use that power. And this will require, especially people on the left and Greens, to change the way they think about defense and to think about defense spending and how we can turn this into not just spending in the way of the Cold War, where the worst people ever became hyper wealthy because of rampant spending, but how do we make a social defense? How do we make sure that workers still benefit in this, communities are still benefiting by this, and that it does not just become a thing where billionaires get richer from an arms race, and we have a situation where we end up in the same kind of society or more unequal than when we were before in the ironic chase to literally defend our democracies. It is very important that we take these very hard questions, and we cannot pretend like there will just be peace because we want it to be, or just because we don't want there to be war. Sometimes we cannot avoid the future that is coming towards us, and one that is happening fast. There were so many opportunities to stop the war in Ukraine. From 2014 until now, 11 years, were wasted. That Russia could have been beaten, held to account. Even before that, we saw in Georgia. Even before that, we saw in Chechnya. We have seen the Russian Federation act again and again aggressively, and it has consistently worked against all of its neighbors and the European Union, and acts as a mafia boss in Central Asia. It is deeply in our interest to defend ourselves and make sure we can do it without the United States, which has once again reiterated it has no interest in Europe. And it has one of two parties that is actively hostile to it and hostile to democracy. It is not a reliable friend, it is not a reliable ally, and that is a hard pill to swallow, especially because many of us have American friends, and they are our longtime allies. But it is a country that is also facing democratic collapse, not in a long time frame, but within days and weeks. They have fallen, they have failed, they brought back the man who was an insurrectionist, and people hoped that maybe the insurrectionists would still care about European security. But I and many others warned that this is always what Donald Trump wanted. This is what people like J.D. Vance have said again and again. This is what they are saying all the time at events around the world like CPAC and National Conservative Conference. They are not doing this not in the open. They are talking about it all the time. Believe them when they say they are going to do things and plan for all outcomes. Because otherwise you'll be left with your pants down, and you will be panicked, and you will be having the Munich Security Conference of this year every year. Because this will not get easier. The chaos has just begun. And we need to take serious steps if we want a strong Europe, if we want a democratic world. Democracies need to unionize. They need to work together. The European Union needs to act like the superpower it is and must be if we hope to end this century with democracies and not with just an endless authoritarianism that spans the globe for the benefit of the ultra-wealthy and the weird, bonkers, creepy, conservative conspiracy theories that they worship. That's not the world we should have. That's not the Europe that we have dreamed about, that people fought for, that people are dying on the fields of Ukraine for. That is not what people bought into. That is not the social contract. So we must fight for the one that we hope to have, and not just wait for it to be, because history will be built for us if we do not build it ourselves, and it is created one step at a time, and that is something that we cannot shy away from. Now, all of that is very depressing, and I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but there are also opportunities in all of this badness, and we need to seize them. It is very important that we come together and not let events overtake us. I think often about this quote from Lord of the Rings. We do not choose what times we get. We only get to choose what we can do with the time given to us. And that is the reality of the situation. None of us chose this, but we have to choose what we're going to do with it. So thank you for listening. Please support the podcast, leave a review, give us some support on Patreon, and hope and support everything that we're trying to build, a better democratic world. Thank you.